This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker.
Brandon Sedloff, thank you so much for joining me here on the Jackson Lucas Beyond the Resume podcast, and we are very excited to have you. I've known you for a while. We've sat on some committees together. I think the world of you, and I guess I'm lucky because I'm getting you off a visit to your alma mater, which is Michigan, and talking to students. So we'd just love to dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself, Brandon.
Well, first of all, Lisa, thank you so much for having me. All the feelings are mutual, and I'm excited to have this chat with you today. So yeah, I think, happy to talk a little bit about my journey. By way of background, I am the Chief Real Estate Officer at Juniper Square. Juniper Square is a leading technology-enabled services firm that supports the private market. So our clients are investment managers across real estate, across private equity, across venture capital, and we help provide them with the services in technology infrastructure to raise money, manage money, and report on the money that they've been given by their investors. So it's a really kind of interesting niche that sits at the intersection of technology, finance, and private markets. But my whole background is in real estate. So I've been in the real estate business for about 20 years now. And, the way I got to Juniper Square was very untraditional. I'll start at the end and maybe you can kind of poke around. But, I grew up in a real estate family. I always wanted to be a developer. That's what I always told everybody. But I didn't really know what that meant. And it took me a long time to figure out that I didn't actually know what it meant to be a developer. So when I graduated university, I started on this course, this program, this trajectory to try to figure this out. I want to be a developer. So of course, my first job was with a developer. And I very quickly learned that in order to be a developer, you need money. And we didn't have any money. So it turns out that was the first obstacle. Fast forward a few years, I realized that I was afforded an opportunity to work at a firm called GLG, and GLG provided access to a network of industry experts. And so my clients were investors, and I was helping them do due diligence on their investments. And that kind of gave me a little bit of my first insight to how investment managers think about investing, how they think about allocating money to different sponsors and whatnot. And that was a really interesting journey, which I'm happy to unpack with you. And then ultimately that led me on this kind of like philosophical retrospection around what am I good at? Like, what do I really enjoy? What brings me energy? And the big aha moment, the epiphany I had was that the thing that I really love about my job and my career is I love building and managing professional relationships. I love interacting with people like you and all of our peers. And so I was able to come to this kind of realization, and, happy to tell you kind of how I got there, that, building and managing professional relationships was really kind of the thing that I loved and that I was better than anybody else at. And the area that I had done that in for most of my career happened to be real estate, but it wasn't constrained to real estate. There was nothing inherent about what I did that forced me to be in real estate. And it was that realization or epiphany that enabled me to think about what might a career outside of quote unquote real estate be. And that's how I got introduced to the founder of Juniper Square, Alex Robinson, through a real estate connection. And, we set off in, the last 9 years, we've been building and scaling basically a technology company that focuses on real estate as one of the sectors, but not the only sector. So there's a ton to unpack in there, and happy to dive in wherever you think it might be most useful.
Well, I love your backgrounds, and I think it's so fascinating. I've worked with students who think they want to be architects, and then they think that means because they want to run development. And so when you talk about a student in college thinking about they want to be a developer, not knowing all the pieces of what it takes to get something done is fascinating. And I love the fact that, you realized pretty early on, which is true, it all comes down to the money, right?
Yeah, it really does come down to the money. And I think the other thing that I observed is that it's so easy to say, I want to be a developer, I want to be a planner, I want to be an architect, I want to be this or that. But to really understand what it means, you have to spend some time with the people in the industry, not just the people you see on stage at a conference where they're giving you sound bites about all the sexiest, coolest stuff that has sizzle, but about really what it means. And I could think about a few experiences that I had, one in particular with a very prominent global, one of the largest, if not the largest real estate developer in the world. Many years into my career, I still wanted to be a developer. I hadn't achieved that. And through a series of interactions with highly credible people in the industry, I got the kind of the opportunity I had been waiting for, right? Everybody would dream of the opportunity to meet with this gentleman who ran, development for the West Coast. And I remember we were in San Francisco and in a high-rise building. And, I'm talking to this gentleman. It was Jim Bowie was his name. He used to work at Heinz. And, he, at the time, they were building Salesforce Tower. But at the time, Salesforce Tower, which is an iconic asset, was a hole in the ground. And Jim said something to me of the effect, "You want to be a real estate developer?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "You see that hole in the ground?" I said, "I do." He's like, "For the next 10 years, you're going to be looking at that hole in the ground. And by the way, I'm going to pay you the same thing that I would pay a first year analyst who's in the real estate development program, because that's how many years of experience that you have in this area, 0. So even though I had years of professional experience, so it would have meant two things: taking a pretty substantial step backwards financially, which I was prepared to do because that's sometimes what you need to do to get onto the right track. But what it really taught me was that I like things that are a little bit faster paced. I like things where in the course of my day, there's kind of wins and losses. There's things that are more tangible and tactical and actionable. And that was not the only interaction, but that interaction was the culmination of many, many kind of lived experiences that led me to believe that maybe this thing called real estate development wasn't the area for me to be focusing my time and energy right now. Or maybe I didn't fully understand it when I used to tell people I wanted to be a real estate developer. But I had to be honest with myself because nobody was going to be honest for me. I had the opportunity. I could have taken it, and who knows if I would have been happy. But I know that I'm very happy on the journey that I took. And I think, that was the first of many kind of intersections in my career where, the quote unquote right path. Most people, if you read the textbook example of what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to take the best job that you can with the most high profile company. And I just don't believe that. There was nothing wrong with the job, and the company is a phenomenal company. It just wasn't the right job for me at that stage of my career. And I was able to realize that. And that helped set me up for kind of subsequent steps in my career journey, which have been very rewarding.
So I didn't even realize you worked for ULI for almost 9 years.
Yeah.
That must
So
have been I talk about meeting a lot of people. What was that like?
Yeah, so there's a common theme throughout my professional career and really throughout my life, which is to take kind of the big world. The world is huge. It could be very scary. Where do you fit in? What do you do professionally, socially, with your family? And so I've always had this idea of like, how do I make the world smaller and smaller and smaller into bite-sized communities that I can wrap my arms around? And very early on in my career, I was introduced to ULI in San Diego, where I did some kind of early interactions with the young professionals group. They call it the Young Leaders Group. So that's for professionals, I believe, that are 35 and younger. And I was a little bit involved. When I moved, fast forward many years, I moved to Hong Kong in 2007. I had an opportunity to start the real estate business for this firm called GLG that I mentioned earlier. And I wanted to figure out how to build a community in Hong Kong. I had never been there. I didn't know anybody. I didn't really know anything about the work environment. I didn't know my colleagues. And so, but I had this network called ULI, the Urban Land Institute. And so I was fortunate enough to be invited to serve on the board of ULI. And the way that I got that opportunity was I volunteered to start the Young Leaders Group in Hong Kong and then subsequently across the Asia Pacific region. So when I was sitting, in Hong Kong, I helped to start groups in the Philippines, in Manila, in Singapore, in Sydney, in Melbourne. The group in Tokyo was already running, but we started groups in Shanghai and Beijing and all over the region. And it was a very, very rewarding experience. And so for many years, I served as a volunteer board member on the ULI Asia Pacific board. And then as my time in Asia was coming to an end, I was really kind of hankering to get back to the United States, to get back to where my family and my roots were, not because we didn't like Asia. We loved Asia, but because we knew that if my family and I didn't return from Asia, we might get put into a bucket, right? The world, everyone wants to put everyone into a bucket. You're the Asia guy, or you're the credit gal, or whatever it is. Everyone wants to put you in a bucket. And, there's a lot of nuances here. We arrived in Asia right after the global financial crisis and Lehman collapse. So there was a lot of things happening in the US that we just kind of missed, which was a good thing. And I was thinking
Yeah, it's
about, well,
nice to miss that.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about like, how do I get back to the US? Right. And so I'd call people and say, are you hiring? And they're like, well, what do you know about the US property market? You haven't been here for 7 years. I'm like, you're right, nothing. Like, but I can help bring Asian capital. They're like, yeah, it didn't really work out. And so all of this was happening. And I realized, wait, if my world is about community and I don't know what I want to do and people don't know what I can do, what might be a great way to transition back? And so there was an opportunity with ULI at the time to help lead their global corporate development. So I was responsible for all non-philanthropic fundraising from the Institute. The Institute is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit. They rely on membership dues, philanthropic, and corporate giving in order to support their initiatives. So Patrick Phillips, who at the time was the CEO of ULI, gave me this opportunity, and I was able to start kind of a corporate global program to help raise money from companies to support the work that ULI does. And so it was during that time that I transitioned back from Hong Kong to San Francisco. And it was also during this time that I went on a listening tour because I figured, I was scratching my head. I said, well, these people are at the top of their industry. They already give a lot personally to ULI. In many cases, their companies give a lot to ULI. Like, what possibly could we offer that would compel them to find value in contributing further to the Institute's mission? Can't just keep doing the same thing. And so I went on a listening tour, and after about 7 months, two things became very, very clear in all the executive conversations that I was having, whether I was talking to people in Paris or London, whether it was New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, or LA, or it was Hong Kong, Singapore, or Tokyo. Leaders of firms that were involved with ULI wanted to better understand how technology was going to change their business and the industry, and many were interested in alternative sources of capital. And so it was that kind of intersection that inspired me to start connecting the dots around those two initiatives. So I started an initiative around bringing institutional investors into ULI in a more meaningful way. And I helped start an initiative around the intersection of technology and real estate. And this was back in 2013, 14, 15. So the world around technology and real estate was very different then. And, happy to say more, but that was the stint at ULI. It was a few years as staff, helping to lead ULI in Asia, a few years doing corporate development. And then the majority of my time was as a volunteer and a board member.
I also love when you say you went on a listening tour, because I feel like, it's easy to go out and think you have the answers or think someone has the answers. But we're in this very interesting space in the world right now where we don't know what's coming with technology and infrastructure, but I think it's going to be very different in 10, 20 years from now. And so being able to kind of put that listening hat on, I'm sure has served you very, very well.
Yeah, it's something that I care a lot about. It comes out in a variety of different ways, but I was, in this guest lecture that I gave, yesterday in Ann Arbor, Michigan. One of the things that I told the kids was, the thing that is most valuable to them that you don't need to buy, you don't need to study for, there's nothing you need to do, is your ability to listen, right? If you don't know the answer, listen. It, if you're trying to figure out how somebody thinks or what they're saying, or sometimes what they're not saying, listen. If you want to sell somebody something because you have a solution, listen, but listen to their problem. And so many people, when they get nervous, they just start talking, but it's really about listening to both what's being said and what's not being said, which is a huge asset for anybody. And I've really used that throughout my career. You really have to listen to what people tell you they want and need. And the answers are a lot easier than a lot of people think.
Absolutely. So when you were back at Michigan, I always feel like that's where it makes me feel a little bit like, wow, things are changing and they're changing fast. Were there any conversations what you were a part of around like predictions for the future, or where people think capital is going, real estate is going, technology? It's kind of a fascinating thing to think about.
Yeah, I think the world is changing really fast. And the nature of the work that I was doing was less about kind of the market orientation and more kind of career and leadership focused. A few, in interacting with the faculty, the staff, board members of the different advisory centers at the university, and then of course the students, it's really clear that the industry, and based on my own lived experience at Juniper Square, it's very clear that the industry is at a precipice, right? 10 years ago, when when I was at ULI transitioning to Juniper Square, I remember very clearly I was speaking at a ULI event in San Francisco with a bunch of real estate executives. And I said, I want you to raise your hand if you're a technophobe, like afraid of technology. And these are real estate executives. And guess what happened? Enthusiastically, every hand flew up in the air and they're like, I'm one of those. Yes, I'm a technophobe, because at the time, technology wasn't only misunderstood. I think it was a little bit shunned because, people tend to get scared of things that they don't understand. And when you haven't been exposed to a lot of technology because you haven't needed it in your job, it's quite easy to understand how that could be really, really scary relative to something you know really well. Fast forward today, no longer, that would never happen, right? People understand, especially in real estate, it's not real estate and technology. I don't even like the term prop tech. We're not a prop tech company, but I don't like this term. It is real estate. And in order to be in real estate, you have to use technology. If you're not using it, you're not going to survive, period. I believe that. And I know it's a pretty bold declarative statement, but I mean, it is ubiquitous. And the thing that's happening right now is we're having this another aha moment similar to the 10 years ago, which is the use of AI. Do you use AI in your business? And, the hands kind of like went up. Are you thinking about AI a little bit? There was some trepidation, and I get it, right? What is AI? What are the implications? There's moral implications. There's business implications. What does it mean for my job prospects? What does it mean for anything? It seems scary. It's so big. But I promise you, if we're having this conversation 5 years from now, even 3 years from now, we're all going to look back at this moment in time and be like, wow, this was the start of something fundamentally different. And AI is really going to change the way that every industry, including our industry, operates and works, including the skills that are required to be successful. So I just had Alex Robinson, our co-founder and CEO, on a podcast, and I pulled out a quote, which is pretty provocative, but he talks about IQ becoming a commodity. Right? So your intellect is no longer the thing that is going to make you better than anybody else, but you need to be able to use that thing, your intellect, in conjunction with the tools that are available, AI and these large language models, in order to advance yourself. So anybody who's listening to this, whether you're a late career professional or a student about to enter a career in real estate, I think the number one piece of advice I would give to anybody is figure out how to leverage AI in particular to your advantage, because that is a skill set that every single real estate company needs and wants, and quite frankly, doesn't really know how to wrap their head around just yet.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We've done a lot of work with companies that have built out these data science teams, these real estate companies, and now it seems the trend is, well, we don't want them to be data science teams. They're not necessarily back office folks. We want to integrate them into asset management, integrate them into investments, because when we're making an investment decision, that is another key piece of information is what is the data telling us? Not the only one to make the decision. You still need human beings. But did you guys talk a little bit about kind of how EQ overlays that?
Yeah, I mean, EQ is really important. I think it's, it's one thing. I feel very fortunate because, if my superpower is, talking to human beings and building and managing professional relationships, it's hard to imagine, even in a very advanced agentic world, that that's going to be replaced by a robot, at least not probably in my lifetime. Within the real estate industry, there might be some places where, robots have EQ. I'm sure it will happen. But yeah, being, I think EQ is extraordinarily important, and being able to understand what's happening in the physical world and translate that and figuring out how it manifests in the digital world and figuring out the intersection of those two is super critical. And I would say, as you're thinking about AI, data is a big part of it, right? AI consumes large amounts of information and it helps you to translate and use that. But the insights that you can draw from the data that's available to you is really what will give firms an advantage and help them do certain functions faster, create new functions, evolve their business, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's not just about the data scientists, but I would, and maybe you've already seen this, Lisa, I'm curious to get your thoughts, but I won't be surprised if in 6 or 12 months, every company doesn't have prompt engineering as a qualification or a skill set. What is prompt engineering? It's the ability to use the AI tools that exist to deliver outcomes. And it's an art today. There is no science. I mean, there's science behind how the algorithms work, but this is an experiment. And the more effective you are at leveraging the tools that are available, knowing what tool to go to, for what type of outcome or solution you're trying to solve for, knowing how to get the tools to deliver that outcome or solution, knowing how to iterate, where to iterate, knowing the boundaries of these models, both the moral and the actual limitations. These are all things that are going to become very important as skills that all of us need to develop. I don't think any of us are immune, whether you've been working for 10 years, 30 years, or 50 years. I really think this is going to be important.
I agree. My kids are both in college right now, and they've each taken a class on prompts, data prompts. That's the whole class, like thinking of different creative prompts to solve business problems. And it's interesting to me because I sometimes in my free time will like geek out and just pull up, Chat GPT or Perplexity or one of these and just like ask questions. And it's so fascinating to me to see what it's capable of. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. Speaking of that, tell me a little bit about your podcast. I mean, I listen to it. I think it's phenomenal, but tell our listeners about your
Yeah.
podcast and how you started it.
Yeah. So the podcast is called The Distribution, and it's focused on interviewing leaders across private markets. And so that's, it's heavily focused on real estate, at least in the beginning, because that's where my network is and where my career started. But it's really focused on all parts of private markets. And funny enough, I never ever thought I would be a podcaster. I never thought I'd have this ridiculous microphone or the lights or any of this stuff. But what was happening was, I have all these conversations, probably very similar to you do, with executives, and we would chat about their career. We would chat about their businesses. We would talk about what they're seeing in the market, what, is giving them pause, what they're excited about. And in a technology company, we have a lot of people who work here who are really curious. Everybody always wants to know, what does the customer think? Because at the end of the day, we're building for the customer. Contrary to what people believe, we don't sit in a dark room concocting like, we think this is the next new feature or product line we should launch. It actually comes almost always from direct feedback from our customers. And so naturally, as the company grows, more and more people say, I want to understand what the customer is thinking. Well, it turns out that the customer is a very busy business executive, a private equity leader, and they don't always have the time to talk to one person, let alone 5 different teams at Juniper Square about what's on their mind. And so this simply evolved from a place of necessity where, a lot of different people and a lot of different teams inside of Juniper Square wanted to learn about what our customers were thinking, what was happening in the industry. And so my very first email, and I think he knows this, was to Andrew Holmberg at a firm called Berkeley Partners. And I said to
I love Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew's
He's a
awesome.
client of ours and a friend.
And I said to Andrew, I said, hey, can we have a chat about what's happening in the industry? And do you mind if I record it? I just want to be able to share it with some colleagues. And maybe I have this crazy harebrained idea that I'll turn it into a podcast, but I don't know. And if I do, I'll get your permission. So we recorded it. I shared it. And at the same time, I got introduced to my producer of my podcast. And I said, Johnny, what would it take to put this thing online? He's like, not that much. We have to get it approved. You need a name. We went through that, put it online, and, that was the origin story of The Distribution. So we're 60, I think we've recorded just about 70 episodes. And the idea of the podcast is to do 3 things in every episode. Talk about my guests and their origin story. So, where did they grow up? How did they get into the business? What informed their early experiences? Stuff that you wouldn't hear if you were in an interview with them, things you wouldn't hear if they were pitching you or you were pitching them a deal, but really the story behind the story. And then we talk about their company, what it is that their company does, how they do it, and most importantly, why it's different. Because I think a lot of people struggle to talk about why their company's different or why their company's uniquely positioned to do what they do. And then the last part of what we talk about, which is usually what podcasts talk about, is the market. What's happening in the market? What do you like about retailer, industrial, or, SMB, SaaS companies, or whatever the crypto, whatever the topic du jour is. And that's the last part of the podcast. And so it's truly been transformational for me. It's been an amazing experience. And, I'm sure like you, there's nothing more gratifying than getting notes from anybody who listens, who found a nugget of value. It's very, very
It's very rewarding. And hopefully some of the students that listen to this podcast and people young in their careers will start to listen to your podcast because they're the best audience. They just absorb information like a sponge. So let me ask you one more thing, which is if you were to go back to, you're in Michigan, you're enjoying your final year and you're starting over, what would you do? Would you do anything differently?
I don't know that I'd do anything differently. There's some parts of the story that I didn't tell that I think are very different that, I would encourage people to think about. So right after I graduated, I had this amazing job, or what I thought was an amazing job, with a developer who had ties to the university. So again, another way to use your community. And it felt really good. I kind of felt like I was on this path. I had access, I was making money. I had a title. I mean, I had all these things that I always aspired to have, and I was living in the city I wanted to live in. But I had made a promise to my best friend in high school that when we graduated, we were going to go take a year off and we were going to go travel around the world together. And I came this close, if you're just listening, a millimeter away from saying, nah, I'm not going to go on that trip. And my gosh, I am so glad that I did not pull the plug, because I took a year off, even though it felt so hard to rip myself away from this track that felt so good and so fast for me, to go do something that felt not additive at the time, right? Why would I remove myself from the professional ladder that I was just starting to climb? I was on that first rung, and gosh, here we go. I can get to the next chapter or the next rung. And I did. And it was that year that taught me so much. It was just actually, I've got a binder off to the left of my desk here where I have my journal, and I was reading the first page of my journal on the first day of my trip. And it was something to the effect of, it's 10:43 p.m. and I'm sitting at gate, 61 at LAX, getting ready to board my flight to Quito. And I am so scared. And so it was the fear. It's the independence. This was before cell phones, right? Figuring out how to get around overland, navigating countries in a foreign language, managing a budget, getting outside of your comfort zone. And I just think so many people feel like the thing they have to do is just stay on track. And the advice I would have given a lot more clearly to my younger self would have been, no way, Jose, like, don't worry about staying on track. Like, you need to just go do you. And for me, that was traveling, because I mean, even to this day, I love to travel, but it's the things that you learn, the experiences that you have can be so instrumental in the rest of your career. And one totally unplanned positive benefit of the trip that I had no ability to think about at the time was that travel and these lived experiences are a great equalizer. So I could be sitting down with the CEO of the largest real estate private equity firm in the world. He or she and I have nothing in common about the way that we live our life, the amount of money we have in our bank account, the number of years of professional experience that we have, the credibility or the reputation, nothing. But as a 25-year-old, guess what? We had been to the same city. We had looked at the same sites. We had traveled through the same airports. And there was something so magical about the ability to connect with people in the shared experience that wasn't about title, wasn't about hierarchy, wasn't about where you went to school or what job you did or what was the last transaction, but it was about the world. It was about experiencing new places and cultures and getting outside of your comfort zone. And look, not everybody has the means to travel. Not everybody has traveled. There's a lot of things that can kind of fill your bucket, just like travel. It can be hobbies, it can be family, it can be religion, it can be sports, it could be anything. But like, these are the things that I think make the biggest difference, especially for me early in my career. And, I wouldn't do it any other way. Totally unintentional, by the way. Like, if you would have asked me, 25-year-old Brandon, what I would be doing today, I mean, you could have given me 50 guesses and this wouldn't have been one of them.
I know. Well, that's what I try to tell students when we're at the universities, which is like, I was helping somebody go through like getting ready for an interview, and she looked like she was so nervous that she was about to cry. And I said to her, you know what? None of this matters. You'll get your first job. It'll be very different from your second job, very different from your third. Take a deep breath. Spend less time worried about the modeling assessment and more time like just deep breathing. So
100% agree. And I think, I know you believe this too, is there's no one right or wrong job. There's no one right or wrong way. And I've experienced throughout my career so many people who are so miserable doing what they're doing. Some of them are great people. They've been colleagues, even of mine here at Juniper Square and elsewhere. But there becomes a point where either it's the wrong job for them or the job no longer fits what they're interested in doing. And the secret is everybody knows it. If you're not happy, you're not showing up. If you're not showing up, you're not delivering. And if you're not delivering, the person that expects something of you is not going to be happy. And so sometimes when you have to have these hard conversations, instead of it being a hard conversation, which is you're not meeting the expectations or, this job's no longer yours or, whatever it may be, it's actually quite liberating. And so what I often tell people and what I was chatting to the students about earlier this week is, it's really important to set expectations up front. A lot of these kids were going to do a summer internship. And I said, you know, I don't know what's appropriate today. I don't have college interns. So maybe it's bad advice. You can tell me, but I said, sit down with your manager, no matter how old they are, and ask them, what are their expectations of you for the summer? And by the way, please state, what are your expectations of your internship? And, best case is you guys are totally aligned. Most likely cases, they don't actually have expectations for you because they haven't thought about it. And worst case is you're totally off. But guess what? In any of the scenarios, at least it's out there. You're creating the space to talk about it. So if the expectations are totally misaligned, at least you know that and you can work on that from day one versus letting it fester all through the summer, all through your first 6 months on a job and everybody's being miserable. And I think the same applies to any job, right? I mean, any manager should be very clear on what their expectations are of an employee, and every employee should be very clear about what their expectations are for the job or for the company, for themselves, for the job or the company that they're choosing to be a part of. And it needs to be a good fit for both. And I think a lot of people are afraid to acknowledge when it either doesn't feel like a good fit or they don't know if it's a good fit. So communicating your intentions early, I think are really, really helpful. And if more people did that and more people got comfortable having these conversations that might feel hard, and if we can change the framing from these being hard conversations or controversial to just being real, like, I'm going to show up and spend a lot of time here. What do you expect of me? I think that's pretty reasonable. I don't know about you.
Right, right. The authenticity of feeling comfortable. It's interesting. I was up at at Georgetown yesterday, and they had an event, and John Gray was one of the keynote speakers, and there were probably about 700 students in the audience, and they were all real estate students. And I looked around, and instead of watching John, I was watching the faces of the students. And I actually wrote down the kids who I saw just looked so engaged and excited about what he was saying, because I thought they can tell me whatever they want when they come over and talk to me. But at the end of the day, if you're not like so thrilled to be in this room right now, you shouldn't have a career in real estate.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you don't know what you don't know. I mean, it's interesting because I observed, it sounds like you do a lot of coaching, of mentoring, of speaking, of sharing with students. And I've done a little bit of it, but probably not as much as you. So I was standing up there and, one of the students, just totally vulnerable moment said, is there anything you've ever done in your life where you felt scared or you didn't feel qualified? I said, yeah, standing in front of you today, like right now, like, why am I here? Why is my experience relevant to you? Like, I think it is, intrinsically, I believe we all have something to share, but it wasn't totally natural to me to go stand in front of a class and lecture to people about myself.
Right.
It's useful, but you don't know how people are going to react. And so that was a really like, humbling moment for somebody to ask me that and for me to be able to share. But what's been more humbling is even in the last, 48 hours, I made a kind of a passing provocative comment. I said, 90% of you probably aren't listening. And of those that are, 90% of you probably aren't going to follow up with me, even though I'm making an offer to help any single person who follows up, because I actually believe that the easiest thing to do, whether you're early in your career, mid in your career, late in your career, is if you say you're going to do something, do it. So many people offer to do things. So many people say they're going to do things and they don't do it. And sometimes it's just that persistence, it's that follow up or follow through that makes the biggest difference. And sure enough, a percentage of the classes email me. They're like, I'm one of the 10%. You told me, you told us only 10%. I want to be one of the 10%. And guess who the people that are going to make it are? It's going to be those 10%, because it's not because they care about me or they're emailing me, but because they listened. right? And remember what we talked about before. It's about listening. It's about doing the things that you need to do to get ahead. And those are the kids that are going to make it. And I totally agree with you. I mean, if you're in a room with John Gray and you can't figure out how to make that a good use of your time, then there's something really off about your alignment and your interest in what you're doing. Totally agree.
Absolutely. Well, so what we usually end with is it's kind of a little bit of a chilly day here in New York, but are you ready for the hot seat? I
I'm
think
ready
you're
for
ready.
it.
You'll be fine.
Let's go. Oh,
Just a few quick questions. One is an easy one, book or podcast recommendation.
so I love my podcast, obviously the distribution, but besides that, there's a great podcast called The Founders Podcast by a guy named David Senra. And what he does is he reads biographies and autobiographies of some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. And then he summarizes them in usually a 60-minute podcast. And I love that because I get a quick download on some amazing people, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, people who haven't been around for a long time. And then I get to decide if I want to dig in and read the book myself.
Well, that's great. I feel like I might have listened to that. That sounds like something I would love, so I'll be checking that out. So I find that a lot of people who are successful have very detailed morning routines. And some of them do it at night, but I'm curious if you have certain things that you do in your day routinely that are part of kind of keeping your energy up and you always seem so energetic and ready to go.
Yeah. So I am totally random. I don't have any routines. Like there's not anything that I do the same way every day. And that's not by design. It's just, I'm not a routine person. The one thing that I need to do to stay engaged and energized is I need to exercise. So, at some point when I look at my week, the days where I'm most productive, most happy, most engaged are the days where I've taken anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours or an hour to go out and exercise, going for a run, hop on the Peloton. I race or paddle kayaks in the ocean, like racing kayaks. So getting on the water, which I'm fortunate to be able to do here in California, but just doing something for yourself. And sometimes my wife will tell me, she's like, you need to go out and exercise, like go do something, clear your mind. That's how I recharge. So I love to do that.
My husband's mom said that when he was little, she would just say, just go outside. I'm going to time you. Run around the block. Go.
Very similar. Yeah. Just
So
get out of here.
the
Yeah.
end of the day, get the energy out. So I assume you've done some hiring in your time. What do you look for when you hire? Is there anything specific you look for I'm not talking about the hard skills. Obviously someone's going to need to know that part, but are there things that kind of clue you in that this will be an interesting candidate to come work with you?
Yeah, and this came up this week as well. I mean, a few things on this. One, and you may not like to hear this, but I don't really look at a resume. I don't know if anybody does. I usually look at LinkedIn as the very first thing. And even more than LinkedIn, I look at, do we have anybody in common? If you've been working in this industry for any amount of time and, we don't share common interests, there's going to be, that's kind of a sign like to dig into that. But what I really look for in an interview is I ask every candidate I talk to tell me the story of their career or their background, right? And if you're in school, the story of how did you get to university X, or why did you choose major Y, or why did you play sport Z? Like, give me the story. I think storytelling is a skill that has always been important, but is going to become a lot more important going forward, especially with the advances being made in AI, because it's the ability to bring people along on a journey with you. That's more than just a kind of vanilla narrative that's pretty easy for us, formulaic narrative that's easy to give. So I love a story. And I'm just looking for intentionality. I'm looking for consistency. When you look at a career, in reverse chronological order, like Steve Jobs has said in a quote, it always makes perfect sense. But when you're in it, can you link the pieces that have happened before to what you're trying to do today in a story that makes sense? So I always look for that. And then I always look for something a little bit different. I don't necessarily favor people who have all the most prestigious companies or prestigious schools or come from the most prestigious families. It's about authenticity. It's about willing to get outside of your comfort zone. And, here in Juniper Square and elsewhere, it's about grit. I mean, there is no playbook. So can you figure this out? Because I don't have a playbook for you. Like, we have guardrails and scaffolding, but I need people who are willing to step into the gray area, who are willing to take initiative. And I'm looking for that when I'm interviewing candidates.
I love that. I feel the same way, right? People who take the initiative and who care and look for solutions, even if they're not capable of actually finding them. So last thing I just wanted, none of us do this alone. I assume that you've had some mentors through the years who have helped to get you to where you are. I'd love to hear a little bit about any one or few of them.
Many, I mean, some formal, some informal. I think in the early days, one of the most pivotal conversations that I had was with a gentleman by the name of Steve LeBlanc. At the time, Steve was running Texas Teachers Real Estate and then was running their private markets or alternatives business. So a very accomplished professional. At the time, he was an allocator, so investing money with investment managers. We were at ULI. I had met him through ULI and we were on a bus. It was actually in San Diego at the spring meeting, probably in I don't know, whatever, 10, 15 years ago. And it was this conversation that helped me realize what my personal genius was. He looked at me and he said, I said, Steve, I need some help. I need some advice. I don't know what I want to do in my career. And he's like, what's your personal genius? And a bit of his Texas accent. I said, you're using my name and genius in the same sentence. Something's, terribly wrong, Steve. What do you mean? I don't even understand your question. Clearly I'm not a genius. And he said, well, what are you better than anybody else at? I looked at him, dumbfounded, blank stare, never had thought about that. I had no clue how to answer the question. He said, I'll tell you what, let me give you some homework. Every day for the next 30 days, I want you to go home. And at the end of your day, I want you to write down the 5 things that gave you energy. And I want you to write down the 5 things that suck the energy out of you. And then come back to me and talk. And it was after that, in those 30 days, and I've told Steve this many times, and I'm very, very appreciative to him for this, that it enabled me to kind of understand that, the thing that I was better than that I believe, and it's subjective, that I'm better than anybody else at is building and managing professional relationships. The industry I happened to have done it in the most was real estate, but that didn't make me a real estate person. Remember, I told the story before about how that enabled me to get into technology. So that was really, really instrumental for me. And then, I've had the opportunity to just interact with so many industry leaders. Owen Thomas, when he was running Mesref globally and was the CEO of Morgan Stanley in Asia, the whole bank, we developed a friendship and spent a lot of some time running together when we were both living in Hong Kong. And I just feel very humbled to, be able to learn and absorb from people who are, far more accomplished in their career than I am or I was, and people that I aspire to be like and learn from. So there's a lot of examples, but those are 2. And I just, I think mentorship is critical, and they don't all need to be icons in the industry. Anybody who will invest time with you and think about your best interest, not their best interest, is going to be a great mentor. And they don't even need to know that much about you or even that much about the industry you're in, because you need all sorts of people in your life to be able to bounce ideas off of.
That's wonderful, Brandon. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really fabulous I get to sit in the Global Exchange Council with you all the time, but now I really feel like I know the next layer of you. So thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Well, thank you for having me, Lisa. It's been great. And thank you for all you do to help move our industry forward.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. Be grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.